We're about to start, and I'm going to ask my colleague Rassi to stop sharing the screen. Thanks, Rassi. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I welcome you to HELM Engage 4. It's our fourth session in which we're having this rather large online meeting or discussion or engagement about topical issues about the forefront, yes, at the forefront of our minds. Today we've got HELM Engage 4. It's what it means for deans. And it's, of course, deans sit in the hot seat. So this is going to be a very exciting 2 hours. We have five very illustrious speakers, and I'm going to introduce my first colleague, Emnet Wolde-Georgis, in a minute, then Oliver Seale, then Professor Muki Moeng, Professor Denise Zinn, and Professor Jonathan Johnson right at the end. And then we have a long discussion. So the format today is that we'll have them all in sequence and then discuss. So please post your questions and comments in the chat as we go along. Let's start. Emnet Wolde-Georgis is an associate professor and director at the Ali Mazrui Centre, with whom we're partnering today for this event. So he's the associate professor and director at the Ali Mazrui Centre for Higher Education Studies at the University of Johannesburg. He did his PhD at the University of Bayreuth in Germany, where he also worked as a postdoctoral researcher. He did his master's degree in higher education studies at Oslo University in Norway, at Tampere University in Finland, and in Aveiro University in Portugal. He's also been working at Mekelle University in Ethiopia for many years, and he's been researching higher education issues since 2006 and published numerous articles and academic pieces on his research. So, Dr. Wolde-Georgis, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Birgit. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to the Higher Education Leadership and Management Program for organizing and supporting this event. Thank you all also for coming along this afternoon to mark the launching of the book Deanship in the Global South, written by Dr. Oliver Seale. On behalf of myself and the Ali Mazrui Centre for Higher Education Studies at the University of Johannesburg, I would like to say congratulations to Dr. Oliver Seale for his outstanding contribution, not only echoing the voices of the most important leadership position of a university deanship, but also critically interrogating the challenges associated with striking balance between academic research and management positions. Leadership in academia has been characterized as substantially more complex as compared to leadership in corporate context. And deanship in particular has been or has to navigate through complex layers of stakeholders, sometimes with competing interests. In addition to their core functions of research and teaching and services, universities now must address complex financial, societal, and compliance requirements. Due to these particularities, academic leadership refers to different management roles and titles, varying from strategic management, administrative roles, to transformational and visionary roles. Because of its unique characteristics, academic leadership has also been a subject of research inquiry, posing fundamental questions such as what makes academic leadership so challenging? How do academics play a managerial role and lead academic institutions? How does organizational purpose get defined? How do context and environment influence the way we think about the structure and function of an academic organization? Why is organizational change so difficult in higher education? Why are management and change strategies effective in one organizational setting and futile in another? How do power and inequality influence an academic organization and leadership? These questions and multitude of similar thoughts are central to the debates of academic leadership. It is quite interesting to observe the complexity and multifaceted challenges of leadership in higher education through the narratives of leadership stories and journey of deans in South African universities, which are thoroughly discussed in Oliver's book. Even though the issue of leadership in higher education has been the subject of heated debate among scholars of the global north, the context of the global south, particularly the context of Africa, has not been properly or fully conceptualized and discussed. In this regard, Oliver's book is an excellent contribution, filling this gap, providing further insight into the conceptualization and practice of academic leadership, highlighting important experiences and perspectives from the global south. Since the demise of apartheid, South African higher education institutions have undergone considerable change and achieved some of their transformation goals in terms of increased access and success rate, but still has a long way to go to meet the targets set for the sector in the National Development Plan. This has a direct implication on the nature and effectiveness of leadership and governance in the sector. As Oliver argues, in most cases, leaders in higher education take up their positions without appropriate leadership training and prior executive experience, and with no clear understanding of the ambiguity and complexity of their roles. Oliver's book strongly recommends appropriate leadership development intervention for deans in South Africa. The book also highlights the emergence, development, contemporary critical voices of deanship in the South African higher education system. Such empirically grounded research could immensely contribute, not only highlighting the ongoing challenge of deanship in the South African higher education system, but also inciting alternative future for progressive leadership in the ongoing transformation endeavors. Deanship requires innovative and progressive ideas, skill, as well as institutional support, which focus on both strategic academic leadership and executive management. This can only be achieved through generating new and innovative ideas through critical research, documenting and analyzing the diverse voices of leadership challenges and prospects within the higher education systems. This book has just contributed to that end. This book builds on this foundation and provides further insight into the concept and practice of academic leadership, exploring deanship in selected South African universities. There are few research works done that particularly addresses the issue of deanship in South Africa, and this book is believed to be one of the pioneers, paving the way for critical debate in the future. Dr. Oliver Seale has been a colleague and an associate member of the Ali Mazrui Centre for Higher Education Studies for quite a long time. He worked closely with the late Professor Michael Cross, who was also the founding director of the center. It is indeed sad not having Professor Cross among us today to witness the achievement of Oliver's work, but his legacy is captured by both his support and by the inspiring relationship he built with all of us. The Ali Mazrui Centre for Higher Education Studies is grateful and proud of the effective partnership and research collaborations that led to the publication of this book. The center emerged as a Pan-African institution for scholarly research, inquiry, training, and professional development in higher education. The center is established as a knowledge hub for critical thinking and to produce knowledge that contribute to the deeper understanding of strategic issues in higher education through multidisciplinary and policy-related research. Among others, the center hosts a book series on African higher education development and perspective with Brill Publisher. The book Deanship in the Global South is also published on this book series. Congratulations again to Dr. Oliver Seale for the outstanding work. And I would also like to thank the Higher Education Leadership and Management Program team for organizing this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emnet. Thanks very much for introducing today and giving it a good context and frame within which we'll hear the speakers. After this introduction, thanks, Emnet, I'm going to introduce Oliver Seale, who of course is the author of the book, and he will speak about the book, and then we'll have 3 replies to that. So Oliver Seale is the Director of Higher Education Leadership, which is of course HELM, Leadership and Management. He's also a researcher and lecturer, former Director of the Executive Education and Head of Centre for Business Leadership at the Graduate School of Business Leadership at UNISA. Other previous positions are plenty and include Interim CEO at University of South Africa, that's our USAF, Director in the Vice Chancellor's Office at Wits University, Deputy Director General for Training Delivery at PALAMA, which is the Public Administration Leadership and Management Academy. Now, today, he is, of course, speaking to us as the author of his recent book, Deanship in the Global South, Bridging Troubled Waters. I will send a link to the book in the chat in a minute, but for now, Oliver, over to you.
Thank you very much, Birgit, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Emnet, for the fantastic introduction. Let me start and just get my screen shared so you can see I've got a brief PowerPoint, so I will not subject you today to death by PowerPoint. So before I really just get into the book, I really want to express my deepest gratitude and sincere appreciation to my mentor, my friend and my colleague, late Professor Michael Cross, who I think for most of us, Michael was the giant, the academic giant on whose shoulders we all stood. So this is the dedication, this book is dedicated to Michael and to his memory and to his great work, and long may it live on in us, those that were mentored by Michael, guided by Michael, and led by Michael in the academic and scholarship endeavors. So Michael, this is really for you today. And then also I'd like to just acknowledge the leadership of USAF, our CEO, Professor Ahmed Bawa, who's also my leader. I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues and my family that are joining us today for the book launch, in particular my wife and my partner and soulmate, Annelien, and our daughter, Carla. And then also I really want to pay homage today, colleagues, to my parents, my late parents, Carol and Herbert Seale, for what opportunities they gave me. I think back of my life, a youngster on the Cape Flats in a township, I could never have imagined so many years later, I'm here in this place and talking to you and sharing with you this exciting development in my professional and in my personal life. So over to the topic for the day and the book. The book, as you'll notice from the title, is called Deanship in the Global South, Bridging Troubled Waters. And my interest in Deanship goes back to when we started with the HELM program way back in the early 2000s. I'm really fascinated by this intersection between academic leadership and management, and more so later when universities became more corporatized, and what does that mean for the position of dean? So this has been my lifelong endeavor. My PhD thesis was around building capacity for deans in South African universities, and it was a case study methodology under Michael's tutelage. And it was really looking at the 6 universities in the Gauteng region. It was a very interesting study, and this, of course, was the seed that was planted for the book. And the picture that you see on the book, it's the massive migration of the wildebeest, one of the biggest migrations in the world. and crossing the dangerous Mara River, which is crocodile infested, and you'll see almost this cloud emerging behind them. And I think it's often that's what deans face, you know, when they end up in this job, and you'll see why I say that shortly. It goes into sometimes to the unknown. They find it most difficult, and there are challenges lurking and pitfalls everywhere. So this really, as I say, a culmination of my own work and my own research and my own scholarship, but I think also a voice for the deans. I remember when I used to, in those early days of my PhD, you know, when you're in the highs, the mountain highs, and you think, oh, you're getting on top of this, the area of research, and then you go into the deep, dark valleys where you don't know whether you're coming or going. And I had these conversations with Michael, and Michael, you'd say to me oftentimes, where is your voice? I'm not hearing your voice. And at last now, I think we've managed not just to find my own voice, but also the voice of the deans, who for me really hold together what is key and fundamental to the academic project. So this is again in honor of all those deans who make it their life's work to ensure that our universities are a success. And as Emnet mentioned, I am affiliated to the Ali Mazrui Centre for Higher Education Studies at the University of Johannesburg as an associate researcher. And also this book forms part of the development series that Emnet referred to, the publishers being brought. So the book chapters, and you'll provide more information on that. It really starts off on setting the scene for deanship, how deanship has evolved over the many centuries, and where deanship is currently in the contemporary universities. And the second chapter looks at the complexity of leadership and managing in the 21st century university. And what was interesting, the time when the research was done, of course, it was all pre-COVID, but I think what the book also alludes to is that the only kind of constants we have these days in our universities globally, and more specifically in the South African higher education environment, is complexity and change. So we do talk about that quite extensively. Then the third chapter looks at executivism in universities. I think what was interesting that in all the 6 universities that were part of the case study in the PhD, and then of course in the book, they all, you know, referred to their deans as executive deans. And I remember interviewing some deans in one of the smaller universities in the South, and he said to me, you know, one day I was the dean, the next day I was the executive dean, and nothing changed, just more work and no extra money and no additional authority. It was just merely a name change. And so in some respects, that's what happened. Whereas in others, the dean's responsibility, especially where there's a devolution of power, as in the case of one of the universities in the case study, it's quite more involved. And so there's quite a significant amount of management that's required, people management, finance management, planning, and so on. And then it's the fourth chapter looks at the journey to deanship, how they become deans. In particular, the journey comes, most of them come the traditional route through academia, and you'll see what kind of challenges they face in respect of that. And then head of department, head of school, and then dean. Chapter 5 looks at leadership development and really gauges and theorizes around that, because I remember when I started my own research, this notion of leadership development didn't exist about 15 years ago. We talked about capacity building and capacity development, and more so as time evolved, this notion of leadership development, which by implication includes management development, started to emerge. And then in chapter 6, we talk about the managed organizational leadership, which is our theory of change and the mold model. Chapter 7 then looks at what happens beyond the decanal role. And that's just as difficult as getting into the role, is what happens post this position and your life of deanship. And we'll talk a bit about that. And then in the last chapter, we sort of make, it's a summation of the research of work that's done and what still needs to be done in this area, very critical area, very important area in our university. So, of course, we all know this. The this is our world in higher education. We still, I suppose, recovering from fallism and the challenges we have with funding, sustainability. I suppose some of the issues in our education is quite unique. Post-democracy, we're still grappling with issues of access and success. The issues around funding and sustainability are still there. And of course, of late in the last 2 years, the COVID pandemic, which has really thrown our universities completely in some respects, which has thrown up challenges in terms of the whole notion of digital transformation and technology-mediated learning. So that's the kind of world that our universities currently exist in. And as I mentioned, it is becoming more and more complex as we're going along. And I think that poses the challenges, particularly for deans, as they bridge, as they kind of intersect the two important roles of academic leadership and then management within the university. So what's been happening, I think, in terms of deanship as we know it, the complexities, the balancing act is becoming more of a challenge. Most of the deans that are currently in their place are former academics, and those of you who are in the academy will know it takes a good 12 to 15 years to get to a kind of senior professorial role or kind of leader in your academic space, in your academic field. And they're wired essentially for academia, and then they are parachuted into this kind of largely management role when they become deans. And I sort of sum it up in a way, it's a case of moving from I-ness and me-ness, where your credibility, your stature, your status was determined by what you achieved academically and through your scholarship as an individual, to a world of we-ness and us-ness, where you now have to lead and manage a group of your peers towards common goals. And I think that transition, that shift, that change, is really the nub of the problem. Then, as the literature will show internationally, most of the deans have sort of limited capacity or capabilities to effectively lead, and so they need support. They need more than just training, really development towards ensuring that they're effective in this role. So what's come out of the research, in particular what the book focuses on, is that tension between those two roles. One of the deans that I interviewed referred to himself as the meat in the sandwich, or as you would say on the Cape Flats, the bologna in the sandwich, between the two slices, the top slice being the executive, the requirements of the executive and the performativity requirements in the university, and the bottom being the peers, the colleagues, the academics, who are really pursuing the academic project, and often not interested in the kind of management executive requirements. And so playing that balancing role is key. And then, of course, the way the position has evolved, at least in the last 2 decades, is from a position where you almost volunteered to be dean, or it used to be rotational and people would get turns to be dean, to a point where now it is becoming a formal appointment. People go through a selection process, a recruitment process, and there's a contract. Most of the deans, if not all of the deans that were part of this research, were appointed on at least a 5-year contract by the universities. Then, of course, the various roles that's required, again, your technical and your expert role and the political nuances, I think, more and more so as the world changes, this need for transformation generally in our education system. Dean is seen as often the key driver of that change. The move from the hierarchical role, as I mentioned, to this whole notion of executive deans, and as I have said, it's often a challenge because they haven't prepared. I mean, it's not that they don't have the academic leadership know-how and skills. I think that's what makes them really good leaders. But then translating some of that expertise into management skills, it's a different kettle of fish, as they say. And of course, Malcolm Buller in their work, in their own research on this, says academic leadership is one of the few professions where you can enter today with absolutely no training, credentials, or knowledge about. And it's a global issue because less than 10% of deans or even heads of academic departments or schools have actually been inducted to this role or this important function. They do get sort of general induction when they're employed by the university, but not in this role specifically. So it's still a global challenge. And coming back to the leadership development bit, which is my forte, I think it's interesting when I started my own research in the PhD around, and this is part of the most important, the thing that I enjoyed most about the PhD, and I took a very long time to complete. And I used to say to Michael when he sort of started saying, hey, when are we going to finish? I used to say, well, you know, it's not about the end product, it's more about the journey. But the journey was for me moving from a leadership development practitioner to an emerging scholar. So I just couldn't make assumptions about there's a gap and then you need to support that gap or address that gap with training. That was wearing my leadership development practitioner hat, but as a scholar, I had to look at it more broadly. So generally, there's still inadequate research, as Mnet mentioned, particularly in the developing world, but it's growing. It's been growing over time, and it's still an issue we need to address. This integrated approach, we still have some generic approaches. Even when I talk to universities today, some of them still do get involved, get external service providers or consultants in to come and train their people, and often don't understand our world and how it operates. And then specific interventions we've started doing in HELM. For us, the scholarship is critical because it just doesn't only provide a baseline, but it really makes sure that you're in the right space and place, and understanding that you have a particular starting point, a good, solid, evidential base just to develop your particular programs. This is what's come out of our own research within HELM, the work that we've been doing. And so we talk about the developmental orientation to this, which is based on the notion of lifelong learning. A lot of the interventions we still have, I work in government and other organizations on training and development, this kind of deficit assumption that, we need to fix people or we need to fill their gaps with training and development. And we say, if you have a developmental orientation, starting point is the person has the necessary skill set to do the job. That's why they were appointed in the first place. And then the role of professional development and training is about building that skill set to assist them and to perform better and to prepare them for the next level. It also has to be part of the organizational strategy, and that's the MOLD model, which I don't have time to share with you today. In the MOLD model, we flip this approach where normally you would put a personal development plan at the end of performance contract. We say it's actually the other way around. Leadership development should be driving performance, and that's the approach, and then it assists in driving that organizational strategy. The multiple delivery points, especially now, the challenges we face with face-to-face, so we've gone fully online with our programs. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and this is where it has to be context-based and bespoke. Return on investment, then, as I mentioned, aligned to performance management and really informing the backbone of that, and then integrated importantly with career planning and management. And this is the point where we come to around what happens to deans post their deanship. Almost there towards the end, this is what's come out of the training needs analysis we did for deans, and you'll see the bigger bubbles, the bigger circles is around the hard skills we used to refer to in the old days, which is strategic planning and management, financial planning and management, HR and people management. That's not a traditional skill set that you would get in academic leadership, and we can teach that. We can assist people in doing it, and we've been doing that work fairly well in our HELM program. Then I think this is really important. Towards the end of the book, we talk about what happens to life post-deanship. And I think most of them return to the academy. Some move up to the executive ladder, and others retire. But I think there's a resource, a valuable resource within the academy that universities should look at, because there's quite a significant investment in time and effort and resources in deanship. So we should find more creative ways in sustaining that, maybe get the deans involved in other special projects, working with the executives or working with the faculty. I know in some cases that's happening. And this whole idea of becoming better at career management for deans, the kind of ensuring that they know, prepared for going into deanship, supporting them while they're in deanship, and then really ensuring that they're still an asset, they're still a contributor to the university when they leave. So finally, I think where are we going to with deanship in the South? We need to build that critical bridging role. We need to support our deans, preparation and ongoing support. I think this notion of executive deanship, we just have to go back to that and ensure that we don't fall into the corporatization trap and be succumbed or overcome by performative measures, and make sure there's a balance, equal balance between the academic leadership and, of course, supporting the management functions that goes with that. We really certainly would like to look at faculty management models in the country, and perhaps maybe this could be an international study, see what deans need and what examples there are that we could share. And then, of course, the introduction of MOLD, which is our theory of change within HELM, which looks at the leadership context, the leadership capacity, and then introduces 4 different kinds of leadership capital. And importantly is the preparation and planning process for the deans. The deans starting out in the position, preparation for the dean, and then the sort of sunset time of the period of deanship. That's really what the book's all about. The link is there. And of course, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for HELM, and I need to share with you the special discount price at the moment on the book at 35%. So please look at that. The book is available, also available in an e-version. And we look forward to your insights on this. And I mean, certainly we're happy to engage with anyone who's interested in this area of research. Thank you very much, Birgit. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Oliver. It was great. It was a fantastic overview. I've seen some reviews of the book, and there's another review coming out early next year. So it'll be great, and hopefully institutions will buy and use the book. There's also an e-copy available, but people need to kind of scratch around a bit for that. We've got our 3 speakers now responding or engaging with the topic. Our first is Professor Muki Moeng, and Dr. Muki Moeng. She was appointed as the Dean of the Faculty of Education at the Nelson Mandela University in 2015. Formerly, she was the Institutional Director of Teaching and Learning at Northwest University. And she is an alumna of the Nelson Mandela University. She was appointed by the Minister of Higher Education and Training as a member of the Council on Higher Education for a 2nd term. And she's also serving a 2nd term as a member of the Nelson Mandela University Council. She is the outgoing chairperson of the Education Deans Forum. Muki's research interests are in the scholarship of teaching and learning, the democracy of education and democracy and education, humanizing pedagogy and social justice. Okay, if you can share your screen, over to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Birgit. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm trying to share my screen. Share. I hope you can all see my screen. Birgit, if you can just indicate that you see my screen.
Yeah, it's lovely, thanks.
Okay, so it's full screen as well.
No, you need to just put it on full screen.
I'm trying to do that. All right. Okay, thank you for that. Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you for the opportunity, and thanks to Oliver for an overview of his book. Mine is to share my lived experience, and when you read Dr. Seale's book, you would see some overlapping ideas around my own lived experience. So as I start with my presentation, I would just like to draw your attention to what I'm sketching as the environment in which I lead. You will see the number of academics, permanent and contract, and how many students. So for some, it might be that this is a small faculty that I'm leading, and I'm in my second term of deanship. And we offer programs, undergraduate programs and postgraduate programs. And I would like to talk about my journey because, and start when I was a student, because I believe that all of these years have prepared me to become a dean. And I'm going to talk about, the formal preparedness of a dean later on. But I just want to paint a picture in terms of who I am and where do I come from in terms of my student years and my student life. I started in education from the beginning, and I did my master's in the US in curriculum and instruction. And then I did my PhD, researching on the mergers and the educational and the organizational identity of Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University at the time, now NMU. It's important also to understand that, deans have got, like, Dr. Seale said, we've got the qualification, to be considered, deans. And so all of my qualifications were, in education. But then going back to my student years, as I was confronted by issues, and call them issues now, during my leadership as a dean, I had to go back, and fetch some coping mechanisms that I learned from being a student, because I was an active student. I was in the SRC, I was in SARSCO. We created another organization at the University of Port Elizabeth at the time, because we felt that the culture was not speaking to us. And we found the African Cultural Society. So I was involved in all of these societies and organizations. And I think as a dean, that's something that you tap into later on in life. My lecturing years as well prepared me. So I was a lecturer, and then again, senior lecturer, director of teaching and learning. But I also had management roles within, the faculty as a coordinator of a program, and then head of department. We did not have schools at the time in the faculty. And then I moved on to become the director of teaching and learning. And at that time, I really decided, after I obtained my PhD, that I wanted to be involved institutionally and not just be in the faculty. And I was fortunate enough that then Vice Chancellor, Professor Derek Swartz, roped me in some of the committees that were looking at, Vision 2020, looking at the values of the institution, what is it that we need to do? And at that time, I didn't even hold a position, but I was a Senate member, Black Senate member, because faculties also nominate Black academics to sit on Senate. So I was sitting on Senate as a Black academic member. And so, I'm just giving you a background of who am I, as an academic. And so the directorship of teaching and learning really prepared me to have an understanding and appreciation of student life from an academic perspective, not as a student activist myself. And so at Northwest University, I was in Potchefstroom, and I oversaw, 3 campuses, the Vaal, Mafikeng, and Potchefstroom campus, because I was in the institutional office. And that also gave me an understanding, of the inequalities that existed before the institutions merged, and how I had to play a role of making sure that there is equity of provision across the campuses. And so that insight is something that is needed by someone in executive management. So I think some of those things prepared me then as dean. Now I'd like to move on to the expectations of deans, and as I am talking, I'm going to also relate to the preparedness of deans, you know, in line with those expectations. So we are assumed that we are academic leaders, and therefore we are intellectual leaders as well. And there's no dispute in that, because we come from the ranks, and I think most deans come from the ranks of being an academic in a faculty. So you are expected to lead professors, lecturers, associate professors, and the like. And you also have to have that standing so that when you speak, you know, you are respected in terms of guiding and giving that kind of leadership. But you also need to have the experience so that you give, you know, the, not, I wouldn't say correct, but reasonable, you know, guidance, because you have that kind of experience. Decisiveness, and being a dean, really, you cannot be indecisive. You have to take a decision, whether it's a decision that, you know, you want to be liked by people. But as a dean, really, you'll soon find out that, you know, not everyone likes the dean. But then as the leader, you need to move beyond what the feelings are and look at what the strategy that you are driving in the faculty and where that will move you. Political astuteness is important, and this is something that we are not prepared for, because, and politics is not only about, you know, party politics, but it's also politics in understanding the language and the culture of the institution that you are in, and what is being discussed, and how and when you need, you know, to make yourself heard. And I'm a very vocal person, so I sit and I listen, but I do, you know, respond to issues that I feel are not fair, in particular for staff and for my students. We need to be economically savvy and entrepreneurial leaders. That word really is French, so it's difficult for me to pronounce. And so, but there's no preparation for that. So we are fortunate, some of us, if you were a director, for example, I was a director, an institutional director, so budgeting was, you know, something that I am used to, you know, handling, you know, all of these accounts and all of that. But there's no introduction when you are a dean to say, okay, this is how higher education works. This is how the subsidy is divided. There's a look into the SESM categories, and if you are you know, this times 4, and therefore you get, you know, more money. And then if you are this SESM category, which is 7, which is education, times 1, you get less money. And the assumptions that, you know, are around that are that, yes, a science student would need laboratory work, and there's more effort in terms of pedagogy and equipment that is needed to support that one student who's doing mathematics, for example, you know, versus a student that is doing education who will get less, because the assumption is that there's not as much effort that is put in that. So as deans, we have really spoken up about this in terms of saying education is as important as other, you know, qualifications. But this is something that we sit with, and in our individual institutions, then we are faced with a challenge of having to you have our voice heard in terms of budgeting. If the budget then comes to say that you did not bring in enough FTEs, therefore you have this much, and then you have to sit hand in cap, you know, waiting for people, you know, to give you top slicing and all of that. So these are the things that we are really caught in the middle. And then yet at the same time, you have staff members who have no understanding of what you're going through when you have to sit in these meetings, you are 9 million rands in the red to meet your fixed commitments. And then, you know, there's staff members who are saying, we need to do this, we need to do that. And yes, these are wonderful things and important and necessary things that must happen. But you cannot actually do these because of, you know, how the, you know, the financial model is structured, you know, nationally and in some of the institutions. So we also expected to develop and sustain partnerships. So with the communities around you, and this is something that I love to do, to being engaged with the schools around communities, because schools are in communities and you can never, you know, separate the two, because whatever is happening in the community is translated into the behavior of learners in the classroom. So that is important to have, and it's something that is close to my heart. But we also need to have, you know, international connections. So you are expected to really operate on an executive level. And I always joke, you know, with my colleagues here, Oliver, you would like to hear that. I always say I'm the only executive dean at Nelson Mandela University, and everyone else is just a dean. And so when I enter the room, everyone says, oh, the executive dean is here. And then the last one, I just want to move this thing on my screen, is fundraising. Because as we struggle, you know, with funds, as we know that over the past 10 years, really the funding of higher education is getting, you know, slimmer and slimmer. And as deans, you are then expected, you know, to make sure that there's third stream income. No one prepares you for that. And how do you do this? And especially in faculties of education where you depend on schools for you to have these short learning programs. So how else, you know, do you bring in extra income in your faculty? So you really have to be savvy, and with some of us, it happens, and I'm going to talk about myself, it happens, you know, after 3 years, because the first year you're really trying to find your feet, especially if you've been outside of the faculty coming in. And fortunately for me, I was a student at UPE, I was a lecturer then at UPE, NMMU, NMU. So I'm fortunate to do that, but I'm thinking of a dean who's coming in cold into an institution that they are not, you know, actually used to. I'm going to move faster. I think Oliver spoke about, you know, the difference between an elected dean by the faculty versus an appointed dean by a selection committee, because you'll see that because there's a, I don't want to call it a problem, but there's a challenge of, you know, having to balance being an academic and being an administrator. And there are certain things that don't sit well, especially if you are an academic person, when it comes to performance management. And as academics, really, we know that, you know, performance management is a corporate idea. It needs to sit there. But what do you do when the university or the council of the university decides that this is something that the university needs to look into? So how do you then, as the dean, convince staff when you yourself know that this is something that is so unacademic in terms of its and how it's formulated, and how do you move with that? So these are the tensions that we sit with as deans, and academic versus managerialism. And I'm going to move fast, but as deans, really, we are the backbone of decision making. And I agree with you, with the dean, Dr. Seale, who said you are a polony in the sandwich. I really, sometimes we feel like that as deans, because there's management, you know, having the demands that these are the things that need to happen. And then there's a faculty, you know, academics that also have, you know, place huge demands on you as a dean, and you have to really balance the two. Link between senior management and the department or the faculty is really important. But then as a dean, you really need to have high level management expertise. People management is much more important than any kind of management that you'll find, because as I said earlier on, you cannot satisfy everyone. But also as a human being, you know that we are first and foremost human beings. So we need to connect as human beings first before we talk about the kind of work that we need to engage in. So that kind of management style also is important, but at times also poses, you know, some problems. And so I want to move on now to my personal encounters as I am the dean. I spoke, you know, about the subsidy and funding, so I'm not going to talk about that now. And then I want to move on to my personal experiences. In 2015, when I arrived, the decision was already taken that we're moving our foundation phase program to our Missionville campus that is in the center of Port Elizabeth, Ikabega. And at that center, that's close to, you know, Missionville campus is close to the township and the northern areas. And the building was built, and it's an important decision that was taken by the institution that we move our foundation phase closer, you know, to the schools, where really as a foundation phase program, we would work closely with our communities. So that was an important decision taken by the university. However, when I arrived, parents were not happy about students moving to Missionville campus, and they were not informed, and they were demanding to talk to the dean. Yes, and then we arranged a meeting, we sit, and I say to parents, I want to apologize for not communicating in time, but I'm not going to apologize for moving your children to Missionville campus, because that is necessary. We talk about different contexts at this faculty, and this is one context that I would like, you know, my foundation phase students to be exposed to. And therefore, that for me, that was important, and for the university for that matter. Parents walked out. I was like, oh, what am I getting myself into? But those are, you know, that's one of the experiences that I had. But I also had foundation phase students who felt that they didn't want to go to Missionville campus. So, and I had to hop on a bus from South Campus, Summerstrand, to see whether if I send, you know, my students to Missionville campus, how long is that ride going to take them? By what time must they wake up to stand in line for a shuttle to take them to Missionville campus? So I had to take an express bus, and I also took a bus that stopped at all the stops just to make sure, so that when I sit down and talk to parents and my students, I can say, I understand where you come from, and I know what you mean when you say this environment is not conducive, or that this will work. And then I move on. We've had, you know, racism grievances against the lecturer and students, you know, toying in front, and, you know, really demanding the removal of the lecturer. So I'm relaying these stories so that you have an idea of the life of a dean. And these things, you know, happen, and no day is the same, you know, in the office of the dean. And then there was Fees Must Fall. Fees Must Fall, and I remember I said in the beginning that I was a SRC member, SASCO member, so student activist. So I understood where the students were coming from. But now I'm in a position of power, and I need to use my power to understand what is happening, where I can make changes, then be able to make those changes. You know, because for me, you know, it's important that I understand my positionality in terms of the dean, where changes can be made, then I can make those changes. But there were issues as well around the curriculum, which I was happy that my students really have looked at the curriculum. But were making demands that we want to insource everything. So the Faculty of Education must teach everything. And I know in some universities, faculties of education teach everything, whether it's mathematics or science. But in this faculty, we have what we call service faculties, where our students would go out to do physics, maths in another faculty, or accounting or business in another faculty. I see, Birgit, is my time up? All right. So then as a dean, I have made my decisions conscious to have collaborative leadership. Academic student development is important to me. Community engagement, as I said, is also important. The scholarship of teaching and learning, and as a director, and I say that is important because I truly believe that, yes, you can have the scholarship of discovery, but you find there are some academics who prefer really to use their classrooms as their laboratory, but not just the classroom, but issues around learning and teaching that, need to be critiqued. As I conclude, lessons from my predecessors. I had Wally as my dean, really who taught us the importance of scholarship and developed a culture, of research in the faculty. Anna, who was also the dean, importance of delivering quality programs. That's what I took away. Denise, importance of meaningfully connecting with staff and students as human beings. To conclude, the role is challenging. There are moments of fulfillment where you feel like, yes, this is something that I really want to do. But you need to know that you cannot satisfy everyone. And I have learned to choose my battles. And sometimes people do not understand why I would say this one, really, I'm not going to take on, because later on it will be revealed that it was not worth, the fight. Never compromise your values as a leader, because no one wants to be led by someone who has no backbone. You need to stand firm and you need to take people along with you. So you can never fake it till you make it as a dean. You must be qualified and you need to be prepared for the job. In conclusion, deans really need to get assisted to transition from the academic to the administrative course. Thank you so much, colleagues, for listening to me. Thank you. Thanks, Birgit.
Thank you. Thanks, Professor Mukimoeng. It was fantastic. And I know that, I've heard you speak also on the WIL program, and it's just so rich what you speak of and how you reflect about your experience. Thanks very much. And I'm moving right on to Denise Sin, who you've already mentioned. Professor Denise Zinn was, of course, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Teaching and Learning at Nelson Mandela University, and was previously this Executive Dean that you've spoken about, this position, of the Faculty of Education at what was then still NMMU. Prior to this, she was the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Education at Fort Hare University. Her master's and doctoral degrees were obtained at Harvard University, Graduate School of Education, where she also served as a board member and co-chairperson of the Harvard Educational Review. She's now the program head and lead for WIL, which is the Women Leadership Program at HELM. And Denise, over to you. I believe you've weathered the load shedding with data.
Yes.
Oh, good.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Birgit.
Thank you.
I switched to my phone's hotspot and hope that works, because load shedding is supposed to start in the next 5 minutes or so. So I'll just get right into it and hope that I don't get cut off due to the power going off. And I really want to just say that this is a topic that is so long overdue, and it's such an important focus, and there's so much to talk about. So I don't have any slides. I have written out what I want to say, hoping that I can keep to my 15 minutes, and I've got my timer on as well. And I want to start by expressing both gratitude and admiration for the scholarly study by Dr. Oliver Seale on Deanship in the Global South. It's a book that is so long overdue and is filled with insights and analyses and experiences and challenges and lots of suggestions that I think every dean and aspiring dean, and even those who don't aspire to be deans, need to read to understand what the position entails. Every institution, of course, is unique in its complexity, in the entanglements of the physical and geographical context, in the histories, oops, something's happening, in the histories, in the constituencies, institutional cultures, in its people, both the students and the staff and its publics. So as you read Oliver's book, which I hope you will do, it's set in the global, the South African North, Gauteng, and there are, of course, a lot of differences in some of the institutions that we are in that add to the flavor of that sandwich. So I come to this from a particular vantage point. I love that title of the one book Oliver mentioned, I was a dean, and now I'm not. So yeah, I was a dean, and now I'm not. But my experiences as a dean informed my insights at two very different institutions. I was at Fort Hare and I was at NMU still at the time, now Nelson Mandela University, and then the DVC. So in those roles, I came to know about deanship from the inside out as well as from the outside in. So the lights have just gone out, but I hope you can still see me okay. My colleague Muki Moeng, Dr. Muki Moeng, has described with such passion and insight the lived experience of a dean and how it's filled with polarities, joys and despair, thrills and threats, successes and failures. Just these polarities alone could use up a whole alphabet of categories, but I'm going to focus on just 5 letters of the alphabet. They are multifaceted, and they are the P's and Q's and the RSTs that follow. So I'm going to focus on the P's first. You know how they say, mind your P's and Q's, and I think deans really need to do that. So shortly after becoming a DVC, I was in the interesting position of working with 6 out of 7 deans who were completely new to the position. So the whole issue of induction and how does one get people into their role, I was a new DVC, I didn't know where to start or what to do. So there was a perfunctory kind of induction offered to all new academic staff that neither prepared them for their roles nor supported them fully as they took up their positions. And I don't mean this necessarily as a criticism of my institution, which I loved very much, but really the thought and the scholarship and the understanding of what was needed just wasn't there. So as a DVC, I was really in a quandary about what to do. I just didn't feel that that was part of what I could do, getting used to my new role. So what I am going to say in these P's are related to what my experiences were of the most important things that I found made the difference between being a good dean and not. Some of my colleagues refer to these consuming focus that I have on these P's as touchy-feely stuff. I don't think they're touchy-feely stuff. I actually think touch and feel are really important. And so the first set of P's are people and personalities. As I struggled to establish rapport, support and leadership in this academic portfolio, I was struck by how different the deans were and what their backgrounds were. Some had served as acting deans previously, so I had a sense of the role and functions, but not the complete hold on it. Some had been HODs previously. One had been the director of a center. One came in from left field with practically no experience in academic leadership in a university, but was seen to be an intellectual. They all had academic credentials that were sufficient, but varied. Some had had management experience and some had none. Strange but true. There was no sense of the ability or competence to handle budgets as large and complex and particular as those have to be managed in faculties. Actually, and I've got to be honest, the same was true of me. When I first entered the position as a dean, I had no idea how to handle a faculty's budget. And I remember on coming into the position at NMU, at Mount University, after having been a dean at Fort Hare, the whole finance system was completely different. The way they organized the budget was different. So even though I came in as a person who had been a dean in a previous institution, there was still so much to learn. And I had to learn as I went along with the help of supportive people in the finance division. So that's really important to reach out to the people who have the expertise. Many deans, however, refused to do that. They felt it was it would be a reflection on them and their knowing what was needed. So they were afraid or ashamed to ask for help where it was really needed. However, the biggest differences between them was their ability or competence to deal with people. All kinds of different people with whom a dean comes into contact, from students and parents to academics at different levels to administrators, cleaning staff, and everything in between and beyond. What was significant in this difference between them was their willingness and ability to firstly get to know and learn about themselves. Some were completely unwilling to learn to know themselves. It required a particular kind of vulnerability and humility that was essential to developing the leadership skills for dealing with others, with your team, with your students, with your publics. So personalities is another P. It's linked to people. And you have to get some understandings when you are a dean of personalities. And nobody thinks about this. They'll teach you about finances. They'll teach you about how HR works as you go along. But teaching you about personalities just doesn't come into the picture. And you've got to know your own personality as well as that of others. This is tricky terrain, as there is the danger, of course, of stereotyping and simplistically labeling others. However, I maintain that being able to identify broadly and constructively personality typologies that help one understand oneself first and one's people is an essential skill set of a dean to enable one to work with a diversity of people. Herein lies so much richness and potential and so much opportunity to learn from others and to innovate because you've learned from others how they do things differently. So understanding personalities provides a handle or a set of handles to hold on to as one negotiates a relationship with those you work with. Each of the deans I worked with had different personalities. The ones that were most successful, and Mookie comes to mind here, were those that had the humility to want to know and understand themselves, to understand their own strengths and what they could contribute, also to know their weaknesses, what triggered them, what tripped them up, what pressed their buttons. I had lots of things that triggered me. I had to go to a psychologist to help me understand myself because they triggered me unnecessarily. I had to look at what it was that had happened in my experience in my life that made that particular thing the thing that got me worked up and unable to think rationally. So most importantly, the willingness to learn how to deal with people and personalities in constructive ways, to learn how to do things differently and better, always learning to become. This is not only an essential part of humanizing the space in which one is a leader, like a dean, but is also essential to understand how to deal with different kinds of people, how to approach one's staff, how to approach one's students, and then most importantly, how to approach the curriculum that you are busy with, that is the center of your academic work as a dean. The other P, the fourth P, is politics. This awareness is key to your own learning as a dean, as a leader in any position, including self-leadership, so that you are able to look at yourself from the outside in, to recognize how you show up in your engagements with others, the impact this may have on your relationships with your various colleagues and students, and how this affects your inner values, and critically, the nature of your engagement on the systems in which you operate, particularly inside the institution, but also outside the institution. To many people, politics is a dirty word, you know, especially when we think about the dirty politics that we see on our TVs nowadays. So that's politics with a big P. But there's also, of course, the politics with a little p, the ways in which people maneuver and strategize to get what they want for various reasons, who they know, where they're located, to get more resources, to get pay increases, to get favors, to get leave, more lenient workloads, more responsibility, less responsibility. So politics, accepting that politics is there, it's going to be there, to get to know it, it is part of the institutional culture, and to know how to navigate it. Those are the 4 Ps that I would say are the most important ones. Coming to the Qs, the biggest Q is the quality. The quality in academic faculties have a critical connection with the quality of the leadership in that faculty, starting but not ending with the deanship. The quality of that leadership is the ability, strongly linked to the ability to roll with the punches that come at you, the paradoxes that exist, such as the one contained in the oft quoted, especially from finance, you have to do more with less. That's a paradox. It is also linked to the quality of the programs that you offer. And Mookie just spoke about how she learned from one of the deans she worked with before, how that was absolutely critical. And I would say the quality of the pedagogy, how the people teach in the space that you find yourself in, as well as the quality of your staff doing the teaching. And you have a lot to do with the quality of the staff and what they are doing. So doing research, engagement, teaching, admin work, quality is critical. What is not about quality is the quality of your students. Your students come to learn. There is no such thing as the quality of my students is not good. They come to learn. They come for the other big Q, which is the qualification that equips them to get out into the world and take it on. And this has to be front and center of the dean's role and goals. So I'm coming to the rest, the R, S, and T. The big R I'm going to focus on here, besides responsibilities, the fact that you have to take a rest in order to replenish your intellectual, physical, emotional, and spiritual stores that Oliver mentions, leaves deans in a place of burnout and exhaustion. The big R for me is resilience. You have to be able to not only have the grit to do what it takes. People often say resilience is about having grit, to stick things out no matter what. But some studies on resilience show that resilience is actually about the capacity to adapt to new conditions, to uncertainty, to enlarge your worldview, rather than sticking to old rules and norms which are comfortable and familiar. And that's a very important thing to take on as a dean. If you're going to be resilient and roll with those punches, you actually have to enlarge your worldview. The S, of course, there's the S that stands for sandwich, as many people have spoken about. And you know the sandwich, yes, there's the bologna, but there's also undercooked meat, which can sometimes be raw and bloody. There's also overcooked meat, which can be tough and dry. So deans fall into all of those categories, and getting it right to be tender and spicy with just enough to be able to be flexible is another important one. So coming to the S's, so besides sandwich, there's the S that is scholarship. And I'm sure Jonathan will talk a bit about this, but this is a real difficulty for deans. How to continue their scholarship. with all that's come at Deans over the past 5 years, the past 10 years, I would say, it is tremendously difficult to do this well. Of course, Jonathan Jansen is an exception here, and I think maybe some others. Not many get it right. Because you need to look at things from a much broader angle than your own discipline. And it takes time to produce quality research, to do quality supervision, given the fractured demands on a dean. So what becomes increasingly intriguing as a dean is, in fact, the nature of leadership. And here, one of the books we used in the faculty at the time to look at leadership, our leadership as a team in the faculty, was Jonathan's book, Knowledge in the Blood. And it's an example of how one takes what is currently in front of one and gets curious and then starts looking into the scholarly understandings of that. I'm coming to the last one, and that is the T. The T, there are two T's. The one big one is transformation. Of course, everybody knows that transformation is this big thing you all have to do. But what is it? Everybody thinks about transformation differently from different perspectives. And one of the most important things, I think, as a dean that you've got to take on as somebody, one of your goals, one of your KPIs is going to be something to do with transformation, is to look at how you get people onto the same page. Now, getting people onto the same page doesn't necessarily mean they all speak the same words. They don't have to be sheep. They don't have to be followers of a dogma. It is about getting onto the same page with different words, but making sure that that page is part of the book that you are busy within your faculty. So the discussion of transformation requires ongoing thinking, but not just within your faculty, but also within the team of deans. And that was a very important aspect of deanship, was being part of a team of deans that thought together about the institutional vision and mission and how together in different ways they were going to try to get that right. And Birgit's light has come on, so I want to start with the last T. I want to finish up with the last T. And that's one that Oliver also mentioned towards the end of his book, and that is the transitioning out of deanship. I think many institutions are careless, and I say that word as two separate words. They could not care less, it seems, what happens to the deans after they have put their lives on hold for the sake of the academic faculty. Some institutions don't even offer deans the security of an academic position after they have been deans. They have put their scholarship on hold. They have not been as productive as they used to be as academics. And now they're at the place where, what next? There are only so many DVC positions available. If they're not going to get into their own academic faculties, they go out into the field in a worse academic shape than they were before. And so I'd like to speak also to the HEI leaders out there to say, deans have to be taken care of. And in particular, deans, you have to take care of yourselves so that you prepare for the exit from that particular position. And I'm going to stop there. So thank you very much, colleagues, for listening.
Nisa, thank you so much. I'm so sorry that I'm always chasing time with speakers on these sessions. There's just not enough time, it seems. Denise, thank you so much. And I've heard so much of it before in the many other programs you have, and I love hearing it again. It's now my pleasure to introduce Professor Jonathan Jansen, who is our final speaker of today, and who's a distinguished professor of education at Stellenbosch University and president of the Academy of Science of South Africa. He's a curriculum theorist, and his research is concerned with the politics of knowledge. His forthcoming books, and I'll say books, of course, forthcoming because there's two that I'm aware of, but there's of course many that have passed that some of you are familiar with. So his forthcoming books include The Decolonization of Knowledge at Cambridge University Press, and Bewitched, the title is Bewitched, a study of chronic dysfunction in a sample of South African universities. He leads a national study on the impact of the pandemic on the work and careers of women academics, and some of you may remember it as the CARS study that we have featured and discussed in various forms. And he holds a PhD from Stanford and is an A-rated scholar of the National Research Foundation. Professor Jansen, it's a pleasure to have you here. Can I hand over to you?
Thank you very much. Can I start by congratulating Oliver on this amazing book, which I had a chance to review as an outside reviewer. It is a fantastic piece of work, more so because very few people research the deanship in South Africa. And so that is fantastic. Well done, Oliver. I will be laying a charge against HELM for, on a human rights question, in that it organized the seminar in the middle of a T20 World Cup clash underway between South Africa and the West Indies. That is very insensitive, but I will talk to you about that some other time. Anyway, good to be with you, and it was good listening to two former deans as I sat in on the session. Now, I've been a dean twice at then Durban Westphal, University of Durban Westphal before the merger, and then at the University of Pretoria, and then of course the Vice Chancellor at the Free State University. And so, I bring two perspectives to this discussion. The one is that of a dean reporting upwards to management, so to speak, and then of course downwards to the academic team, and of a VC receiving deans and the reporting of deans via Liz Langer, by vice rector, as they call it, the Afrikaans universities. So I've sort of seen the problem of deanship, from both being an active dean, but also working with deans in the senior team of the university. Let me also just say this, that when you are a vice chancellor, you realize very quickly the limited authority that you have as a leader. The real decisions are really made in the faculties by the deans, and then also the HODs. And so you can preach till you're blue in the face about transformation and have all kinds of schemes, and I've seen many schemes by university executives, if you will, to advance transformation. But, if that HOD in chemistry or sociology decides to slow walk the appointments through the departmental structures, there's absolutely nothing you can do in a large university with 187 departments and think that you're in charge. The only person more powerful than a dean in this respect is the secretary to the dean and to the HODs, but that is a subject for another day. I want to echo what everybody else has said so far, and that is that the role of the dean is more important than ever before. So I won't be going through these issues again, except to just mention this is a period of high uncertainty. A lockdown means you've got to land on your feet, and the deans, more than anyone else, in the context of pandemics, are of course the people who have to make crucial academic decisions. The decline in funding in real terms, you know all about that. That is a very serious issue which impacts on your ability to run a faculty or a school. Student disruptions is part of us. This book that I'm just finishing now, polishing up the 9 chapters. It's just struck me, I've got a whole chapter just on the continuity of disruptions since the very founding of the first Black university, University College of Fort Hare, all the way into the present. And that's not going to change anytime soon, but it has huge implications where things lead to shutdowns, etc., for the academic integrity of your faculties. The growing corruption, which is a huge thing. I think most of you might not be aware of it because you only read about it through spectacular headlines, as you saw last week with Eunice's tasking report, but actually it's quite widespread across about a dozen universities, and it saps the energy of a faculty dean to simply manage those kinds of intrusions into the academic project. And then, of course, the assault on academic standards in all sorts of ways, which very much has its roots, I think, not just in history, but in the logics of neoliberal economics. So this notion of lowering the promotion standard so that more Black people can get promotion. Eunice is a chief culprit in this respect, but they're not the only one. The fact that publications and this whole drive towards optimizing the income from state subsidies has now become so incredibly bizarre that I'm surprised university leaders aren't calling out academics. There's a university in Johannesburg where one academic publishes 138 articles in 1 year. Now, you know, and I know that's bullshit. I don't care whether you're in engineering or whether you're in psychology, it is impossible, even in a team context, to produce anything that resembles quality of that order. It's just, and what that does, it takes money away from elsewhere, where people are doing worthwhile research. And then, of course, the lowering of the academic standards as far as pedagogy, teaching is concerned. That's a huge issue. One university, I won't mention the name, instructed its staff to do multiple choice questions as a way of getting through teaching 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 students per academic. I can't tell you what damage that does to the academic project, all of which makes the role of the dean so crucial, not just in managing academic corruption, but also in advancing the academic project beyond it. What I just thought I'd do for a few minutes is to make a distinction between two kinds of deans that I have observed over the years and tried to create my own way out of it. And that is, most people who come into the role of deanship come in with a very strong administrative orientation. Very few come in with a strong academic orientation. When you come in with a strong administrative orientation, you take great pleasure in signing a leave form. You think you're important because you balance the budget. You really are caught up in the, in the managerial, administrative minutiae of the faculty. And you must have that. You must have that kind of competence within the faculty. But if that is your life, if that is your identity, then the stuff I just talked about, okay, will not, in fact, be effectively addressed. And so my argument has been over the years to prepare more and more young academics for a stronger academic leadership role orientation. What do I mean by that? By that, I mean that you have to raise the academic standards of our faculty. Faculties of education where I work, for example, are pathetic in terms of this pursuit of, salami slice publications in order to satisfy the dean. Yes, the dean is often behind this because you don't want to look like a fool when your DVC for research puts up the comparative stats and you're far behind engineering and science and you're lagging at the bottom with economics and law. I understand how that kind of shames a dean. I've been there, right? But you have a different task, and your task is to raise the academic standard of faculty in every respect. You have to, as a mission, as something that brings you to work every morning, invest in the rapid advancement of the scholarly standing of your academics, of your staff. So you're a dean of 70 people. You really have to make sure that each and every one of them are accounted for in terms of their academic trajectory. That's a very different mindset, okay, from signing leave forms and doing the stupid thing they call performance management, all of which sucks the lifeblood out of an academic dean, in a university, you have to shift the focus, especially in the humanities and the social sciences, from the endless production of articles into scholarly books, and then being able to show people the difference between your first book, your second book, and your third book. That is the academic leadership we lack in South Africa at the moment. By academic leadership, I also mean being bold enough to encourage the deadwood to leave. So when I got to the University of Pretoria and I saw that there was a whole lot of men, white males mainly, who became deans simply because they were men and because they supported the British. They were faithful to the nationalist project, the white nationalist project. They served in the military as they were required to do, and they kept things like kufut on the Aylayunat on their CVs, which I asked for when they sent it to me. Now, clearly, those are not people who have become academics ever, okay? And so I went to the Vice Chancellor and I said to him, look, you brought me here to change things. I want to suggest that we buy out these through a retirement, these 15, I think it was, mainly men, but a couple of women as well, so that I can free up the money to hire some really smart, young, white and black academics who are going to become serious scholars. And we did that, and so on. Now, of course, I did that too, to some extent, at the University of Johannesburg. We didn't have a lot of money, but there were other ways in which to bring forward outstanding scholars that today offer leadership when they were nowhere to be seen in the university admin system at the time. And then you can't be an academic dean. You can't persuade people unless you demonstrate scholarship through your personal example of leadership. People don't believe you. You can't stand up in a faculty board meeting and say to people, I want to see scholarship of high quality if you are a hypocrite, if you don't do it yourself, if you don't show. The reason I taught first year students as a Vice Chancellor, all of them, obviously with a lot of support, TA support and so on, but the reason I did it, so there's no professor can tell me in the Senate that they're too busy to get to their research, okay? And so the same applies at the level of the deanship. If you're not teaching actively, if you're not supervising actively, if you're not demonstrating through publication and research what it means to be an academic dean, don't expect people to follow you. And then you, of course, have to demonstrate the scholarship of teaching within the faculty culture, okay? Ban multiple choice questions unless the discipline allows for it in particular areas of teaching. But this notion of doing it for the sake of time, as opposed to exploring deeply what it means to learn, okay, in a particular area, and don't use the assessment system as a way of managing your time, because that is a disaster for the project of advanced scholarship in the university. That is a very different orientation to the one that I call the administrative. And so let me conclude with 4 ways in which you can make that shift from being primarily an administrative dean to being primarily an academic dean. The first is, as I suggested earlier, is that you have to establish your own academic credibility first, okay? Therefore, don't become a dean before you're ready for it. Don't allow people, I have so many young scholars right now that I mentor across the country who are being forced because they're Black and because they're women and because of the pressure for equity, which I understand. But in the process, they're destroying their careers because they haven't yet built up the academic credibility through their scholarship that enables them in 4 or 5 years' time. So now you're under pressure, there's status, there's political pressure, there's obviously salary increments, I get that all. But I don't think you rebuild the system, which will be with us hundreds of years, hopefully, unless you work to establish your own academic credibility first. Number 2, build a strong administrative unit. You have to have, and I can rattle off names of people whoever I've worked, whom I asked to lead the academic administration of the faculty and when I was a vice chancellor of the university, so that I did not have to worry. I asked the right questions. I was involved in some of the key decisions, but I couldn't be able to do the academic work unless I had strong administrative leaders taking care of the university, and earlier in my career, taking care of the faculty. Number 3, win the trust of your senior management. Okay, there were deans that reported to me via Ms. Langer who I instantly supported because they had a plan, because they raised resources, because they took me with them to various foundations and so on to make sure that they had money coming in for us to be able to do interesting things. You've got to win the support of your senior management if you are going to stand any chance of being taken seriously in the faculty. And finally, you have to drive your agenda with passion and determination. If you look defeated when you're coming in the morning, if there's no smile on your face, if you're not bouncing down the corridor, if you don't demonstrate an excitement about the academic project, you can say goodbye to followership. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Jansen. We've got quite a few questions coming through, so don't go just yet. I'm going to ask our tech team to spotlight you and the speakers, and Prof. Denise Zinn and Muki as well, Professor Moeng. Thank you for those comments, all 3 speakers. If I can start with the questions going backwards, and I want to start at the back ones. Apart from the compliments that came through, I'm going to skip those. You can read them yourselves. I'll send you the list and the printout of the chat. I want to start at the back, Jonathan, for you, this one. It looks, so the question is from Sue McKenna. The risk of raising controversial matters. The UNISA report indicates the tension with Senate. So you're aware of it, no doubt. It does not really look at much at the weakening of Senate, what we saw at UNISA, and its role in stewarding the quality of the academic project. So the need for a strong deanship must be tied to the need of a strong Senate. How can we ensure that deans understand their role in safeguarding the academic project and not simply administrating people? Can you comment on that?
Yes, it's a very important point. And there's 2 sides to this. The first is I saw earlier versions of the UNISA report, which had much more about the Senate in it. Secondly, in the book Bewitched that's coming out, there's a whole chapter on the Senate. If the Senate fails in leading the academic project, the university becomes dysfunctional. You see that very clearly. So you have to ask yourself, why do universities, and I won't mention names here, that are highly functional, why are they functional despite the fact that they go through severe crises? UCT went, I have to mention them, they went through some severe crises and they still do. Okay. And they keep landing on their feet. You know why? Because they have a very strong Senate. Okay. And so when you talk to colleagues at UWC, for example, and I've interviewed now 110 people, and you talk to colleagues at UWC, they will tell you that when they went through the Battle of the Brines, or when they went through that incredible downturn in their revenue streams, the reason they survived was that the academic project took center stage. They would tell you a Wally model would show up in the Senate, okay? A Stan Ridge would show up in the Senate. A Jake Scarville was part of the Senate. In other words, the Senate wouldn't let you get away with murder. In dysfunctional universities, the Senate is invisible.
Any comments on how to safeguard against it, or is this what your book is addressing?
I think that's what the book addresses. So the final chapter has very specific practical things that universities can do to embed the imperative. But listen, the leadership doesn't come from the deans unless the vice chancellor sets the tone. You know, I don't like all these King reports because I think they're overly self-righteous. But there's one thing about the King, those King 1, 2, 3, and 4 that I really like, which says the tone is set at the top. And when the tone is set at the top, when the vice chancellor and her team are exemplary in leading that, it makes it easier for deans. But when they're invisible, when they sit back and the rot kicks in, it's very difficult for a dean to be a hero or heroine in those kinds of situations.
Yeah. The next question, Denise, can I ask you to comment on this one? That the dean represents, on the one hand, the faculty, which is exactly that wedge you were talking about, that sort of sandwich in the middle. So on the one hand, it represents management, it looks down, or represents faculty to management and vice versa. The answer is, of course, that it does both. Well, a dean, she does both. Can you comment on the shift from elected dean to executive dean that has increased the focus on management over leadership or over the academic project?
Yeah, I think all the colleagues who are speaking today can probably speak to this one. And I think you should ask Mookie this question in particular, because she loves her title as executive dean, as she told us. But humor aside, I think that the nature of what it is we are required to manage in a space that has multiple functions. So there's leadership, but there's also management, and the two go together. They're not actually separate. I don't think that they are separate. I think they go together, and sometimes management is necessary in order to ensure a well-functioning faculty, but I think it's how you do it. So the idea of elected deanship, I think, is probably something that many people still desire, but I think we have long passed that particular gateway. I think to go back to collegial deans requires a fundamental shift in how we think about universities and how they are managed. I think for those who do find themselves in those positions, the important piece is going to be to, I think, look at the spectrum of what it is you have to do. I would agree with Jonathan that the academic leadership is the critical piece. That's the critical role. But you cannot, I think, get away with the fact that the faculty has to also be well managed, and that there is some accountability that is required in terms of managing a faculty well. So my answer is you have to really try and straddle both.
Thanks for that, Denise. Mookie, maybe the next question I can ask you then. Eureka Rosenberg commented on that there's a narrative around deans that they're squashed in this sort of impossibility, playing up and playing downwards, and somewhat there's a big dilemma. But there was a comment here saying there's another way of looking at it, that the bologna in the sandwich, which I had already a comment saying it's like a Gatsby, is that we are uniquely positioned to provide a scholarly input into the shaping of the higher education institution and a critique of the grip of managerialism that is affecting us. Who else could do that better than the dean, than to manage on the one hand into management and saying, there's certain things that they might not be considering. Would you comment on that?
All right, thanks, Birgit, for that question. I think the dean, like Jonathan was saying, it's so strange to say Jonathan because I always say Professor Johnson. But now I'm the executive dean, so I can say Jonathan. But what Jonathan is saying, it's really, the dean plays an important role, and the dean is powerful. And I'm not saying this, lightly because I'm the dean. I remember at one point I was saying something and a colleague of mine said, "But Mookie, you are the dean." And I said, "So what?" And she said, "Whatever you say, we take it really seriously." So I had to sit back, and reflect on that and say, so the position that I'm holding really is a powerful position. And how do you use that as a dean? And what helps? If you are an academic, if you come through the academic ranks, you know what your priorities are. It's academic leadership, because that's what, the faculty is built on, and that's what it needs to stand on. However, as Denise is saying, you also have this responsibility of managing and doing administration, because the faculty will fall if you don't do that. But I also want to agree with Jonathan, you need to have administrators around you. The HODs, the 5 HODs that I have around me, have different strengths. And it was important for me really when I was sitting while they were being interviewed to listen to what is it that these different people are going to be bringing within the management of the faculty. So yes, deans are important in shaping, and especially at Senate, because there's a growing tendency of having senates these days being managed in this, sort of strict way. There's no discussion, it's pointers, and this one talks and that one talks, and we just have to sit there and listen. But then if there's, an engagement like we do in faculty boards where academics, engage about academic matters, I think that kind of engagement also needs to be seen at Senate. And I think deans have an important role, but at Senate, HODs also sit there, school directors also sit there, but it is really dependent on the VC to set the tone. Thanks.
I'm going to be forward and just call you by your names. Prof. Maeng, you said Professor Janssen or Jonathan and Denise. May I just ask you to please comment on the questions if you feel you want to comment on it. If not, then I'll pose another one. Jonathan, if I can ask you, the question came up here that any thoughts on deanship challenges in a strong faculty governance environment and an environment of decreasing enrollment and faculty line cuts. What does the dean do in an environment where the fiscal, the fiscus is shrinking and enrollments are shrinking, which we now know from some of the universities who only have 2/3 of the enrollment, given what's happened over the last 2 years. Any comments on the role of the dean here?
Yeah, look, I mean, one of the things that is so crucial for a dean is to make sure that you have the numbers. And your academic project goes nowhere if you don't have enrollments that enable you just at a very, basic level to survive. And that means more postgraduate students, particularly at the master's and doctoral level. And that, of course, means more undergraduate students. So what did I do? And this is where, again, I'm taking the dean out into an activist role. Muki said something that I really, really appreciated, and I wish you guys at HELM would have a workshop just on this. And that is the role of the dean. And Denise also referenced this. The role of the dean as a political figure. You are a political figure, not with a big P, okay? But you're a political figure in that you have to figure out how the balance of forces in the institution and outside the institution, works to or can work to your benefit. So one of the things I did when I came to the basic thing of enrollments, and we had that problem at one stage, is to be part of the marketing team. Okay, even when I was a vice chancellor, I probably visited about 200 schools in the different provinces because I also had a strategic goal, by the way, and that is I didn't just want Free State students to study there because that just enabled the racism. If you had a poor student from Botshabelo and an entitled student from Unisi in Bloemfontein, you're on a hiding to nowhere. So we got the best Black students. And white students from Durban, Cape Town, all the Polokwane, and so on. But I went out there. So you can't wait for the students to come to you. You've got to do something in your faculty to make your faculty the best possible place for a student to want to study, in our case, teacher education. So those are part and parcel of the package of the deanship. And I agree. Again, I'm not suggesting you abandon the managerial and administrative roles. Okay, I've never done that. I am suggesting get the right people in that position in order to enable you as a dean to also do the other things. And one of those things is making sure your enrollments count.
Can I ask you another question that came through right at the end, and you can also see the chat there perhaps. The question is about politics. How do you push the academic project and divorce yourself from the politics in the faculty? Can you say a little bit about navigating the politics?
Sure. So I want to distinguish two kinds of politics. I want to distinguish petty politics, that is where people fight over the parking space and the aircon. Okay, that you get anywhere in the world, okay? It is very important that you not fall into that quicksand because it will swallow you up. So part of what you need to have as a dean is a focus. So that kind of shit, let somebody else deal with it. I happen to have somebody like Nikki Morgan, Prakash Naidu, people like that who were excellent at managing the parking and the aircon and the toilets and that stuff. And secondly, this is very important. If you ask me what's the most important advice I ever got as academic leader, the one was from Rolf Stumpf before he died. He said, the most important relationship in the university is the relationship between the vice chancellor and the chair of council. But that's another. The other thing was never to run alone. So politically, it is, even though I'm an out there person, I acknowledge that, I never ran alone. People always understood that every political decision, every day, by the way, I would suggest this to every dean, every day, you can do it once a week. I sat down with 3 people, okay, around the table. One of them, my 2 colleagues will know, was Andre Kier. He can be very verbose, but he is incredibly smart, okay, on politics. The other was Nikki Morgan, who, like Nuki and Denise, were activists, so they understood the student heart, they understood the politics of unions, and so on and so forth. And the other was Yeki Muslimtani. In other words, around me were people who could advise me, this is a good political move, this is a bad political move. And that is how you kept the focus. That was at the end of the day. That is how you kept the focus on what I was really there for, which was the academic project. But the academic project goes nowhere if you lose the political battles, okay? Because you must understand, a university is a concentrated resource that everybody wants to get their hands on, okay? Whether it's students or staff or outside politicians. And one of your roles is to be smart about that in order to keep the focus on the academic project.
Thanks for that. Denise, you wanted to say something?
Yes. Now I want to, before we end, because I see we're getting towards 3 o'clock, there was a question that Lynn Quinn asked quite early on in the chat that had to do with academics being held accountable. How does one do that, she asks, that is not performance management? And I thought this was a good question for us all perhaps to give attention to. I'm keen to hear what my colleagues would say about this as well. Because now that I'm out of my institution, I can say, well, I said it even when I was in my institution, I did not subscribe to the idea of performance management of academics. It was a cross I had to bear because the institution had taken this on as a requirement from council to set this up, with the people on council being mostly people who come from corporate environments where performance management was the thing to do. But within an academic institution, I fought tooth and nail. And when I became DVC, this was one of the questions they asked me. So if you become DVC, what are you going to do about performance management? And all I could say was, well, the struggle will continue, because the idea of academics having to account for what they do in terms of a number, like giving yourself a 3 out of 5 or a 4 out of 5 for whether or not you are teaching well, it just made absolutely no sense, nor could you account for what I think Oliver calls in his book, the pedagogy of underpreparedness. It is not something that you can account for. That your students are quality students and that they deserve to learn and be taught well, that there's no, but accounting for the grades they're going to get at the end of the day, how long it takes them to get through a particular course, that is not something that is up to the academic to be able to account for. So I guess, Lynn, my answer to the question, and I think you one of the experts in this area, is to look at the nature of the assessment. To what extent is assessment actually meaningful in getting to how students come to know, to understand and own the knowledge that they learn within the space? And I think one of the ways one holds academics accountable is to look at the nature of their own pedagogy, how much they are learning and keeping up to date, how much they know their students, the ways in which they are trying to get to know their students so that their work can be relevant, their pedagogy and their content can be relevant to the students, and how they do assessment. what is the nature of the assessment that gets to what the students are really learning. So they are actually academic criteria as opposed to giving yourself a 3 or a 4 or 2 in terms of what are really quite arbitrary indicators of success in the academy. But I'm sure my colleagues, Muki and Jonathan, also have real insights into this particular question. It's an important one.
Please go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead. I'm just thinking that performance management, Denise, for your sake, the discussion is up again. And my question was, what have we learned from the past experience that we can take into this new endeavor of looking into performance management again? And my suggestion was then go back to faculties, and, have academics discuss this, because you can't just now say that it's going to be, because it was already almost decided. But then I asked those questions. And this is the tension that I'm talking about, because you have a council and some senior management that believes in performance management to say that you can give a 2 or a 3 next to, that kind of your performance. But what I really think is important is that it's difficult as an academic really to live with that, because we know that there are different ways. And you're talking about assessment, really meaningful assessment, in terms of the work that you do. We have student feedback, because for me, one of the important instruments that you can use to see whether you're doing your job very well is, that student feedback. And at some point, you sit and reflect. One of the directors in at our faculty introduced the reflection part in the student feedback to say, so students, this is what the students are saying about the module, about the teaching and everything that is happening. What are you saying then as a lecturer, reflecting on all of the feedback that you're receiving from your students? And I think that could be part of, how do we judge that? And yes, you need to publish, because that's why you are an academic, and then you'll go and ask, how many publications, and what impact, does your scholarship have? I had an argument with Senate at some point at Poch, when I was arguing for the scholarship of teaching and learning, and people would say, it's not scholarship. I said, how many people read your articles? Tell me, have you been cited anywhere for you to, to claim that you can't have, scholarship of teaching and learning as scholarly work? I think I'm going to end it there. Maybe Jonathan would like.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe a final word on that one, Jonathan.
Sure, and I agree completely with Muki and Denise. Performance management demeans the academic enterprise, demeans us as academics. And when you look at the silliness of the 5-point scale, did you greet your secretary this morning? That is such nonsense. We are not in a factory. We are grown-ups in an academic enterprise. I sit down with my deans, or when I was a dean, I sit down with my HODs, and I said, we have an understanding, a contract about what it is we want to achieve. We can agree on that. Teaching, research, community, the normal stuff. And these are the kinds of things that would count. And there are hundreds of ways in which I can find out and determine whether that is in fact happening. But wasting the time of the university, it takes a huge amount of time, especially in a large faculty, to go and tick off every, it's like, how do you get rid of a troublesome staff member? Do you know in South Africa, it is so difficult, even when somebody, you have to kill a student, if I may use a ridiculous example, before the university even looks, because of the labor relations, overly protecting, sometimes scoundrels. So we mustn't administratively put our faculties and our universities under this load of administration, which, by the way, as Denise would have heard from our teams, has gotten even worse now, as you know, because of COVID and the transition to online. So we're painting ourselves into a corner and forgetting why we are there. Why are we there? We are there to give students, particularly for me, disadvantaged students the best possible teaching, to give them a shot at life, to make sure that out of Africa comes outstanding research that can make a difference in the world, and to make sure that there is an engagement between the university and its community. That's what we're there for. I don't need 15 pages to tick off things to tell me whether we're getting there or not.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to, thanks for that. And I want to also make sure we distinguish what accountability and transparency is from performance management. They're of course not the same, you know. I think that's what you're saying. So thank you very, very much. I want to thank the three speakers. I know we're a minute over time. Thank you, Professor Jonathan Johnson, Professor Denise, and Professor Dr. Muki Moeng, Dr. Mnet earlier on, and Oliver as well for the book. I thank you very much. All of you have stayed on. Again, the majority are right here to the end. The recordings are in the link, as you saw. Please fill out the evaluation form. It'll pop up just before you log out. And we're most likely going to see most of you again in about a month's time at the next Engage. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Very enriching. Goodbye.